Hello, my name is Ben Byrne, and this is how to make dragons formidable in your D&D campaign.
Protectors, our warriors, our shields no more. The age of desolation, an epoch of war.
Dragons are the undisputed masters of the monster kingdom. There's a reason our game has them in its name. Dungeons and Dragons. It just has a grandiosity to it that grave sites and ghouls doesn't quite capture. Dragons are impossibly powerful, awe-inspiring, formidable, and mystical. If you want to feature a dragon in your campaign, then these are 5 tips to give it the build-up and presentation it deserves to make your dragon a truly formidable threat to your player characters. Number 1, draw on mythologies and media that features dragons. Dragons in some form exist in almost all human mythologies. Number 2, decide what dragons are like in your campaign. They certainly don't need to be how they're presented in the 5th edition monster manual. Number 3, of course, explore the themes of dragons, what makes them so formidable. Number 4 is to look at the stat blocks and decide which dragon stat block is right for your dragon or dragons in your campaign. Number 5 is, of course, to consider the dragon's tactics. Many a dragon are felled in combat far too easily because they don't think about how they're going to deal with pesky adventurers. Step 1, look at different dragon myths and media to draw inspiration for your campaign. One of the most famous dragons in all mythology is Fafnir, who was a dwarf. Fafnir from Norse mythology is one of the most famous dragons in modern mythology and set a lot of the tropes when we think of dragons today. Fafnir began life as a dwarf, but coveted their father's ring, a Dvarinort, which had the ability to produce or discover gold. Using this ring, Fafnir gathered to themselves a great hoard and then transformed into a dragon to be able to protect their gold. Dragons, hoards, rings. This sounds very familiar to Smaug, the great dragon from The Hobbit who sits upon a hoard of gold similarly inside a mountain and can only be killed if wounded by an arrow in a very specific spot where their scales give way to flesh. Greek mythology is filled with draconic type creatures that you can draw on for inspiration, such as the Chimera. Typically not thought of as a true dragon by modern media standards, yet the Chimera breathes fire and is also nigh indestructible. The only way it is defeated is when the hero Bellerophon fixes a hunk of lead to the end of their spear and shoves it down the Chimera's throat. When the Chimera breathes fire, it melts the lead inside and suffocates the creature. There's also the Dragon of Thebes, who, when defeated and its teeth are harvested, those teeth are planted in the ground, which grow into warriors themselves, the Spartoi. And I love this mysticism around harvesting the different parts of the dragon. Not too long ago, I watched the movie Spirited Away, and I was so inspired by Haku as this mystical type creature in that movie. Miyazaki was very specific with how he wanted Haku to look and move like an eel or a snake. Very graceful and yet with whip-like agility, and watching that inspired me to feature a Japanese-style dragon in my campaigns. And of course, whatever you think of the plot, the latter seasons of Game of Thrones give us some amazing dragon moments, demonstrating just how destructive and powerful these creatures can be when they unleash their full might. Of course, you can also draw inspiration from the monster manual itself. There is a lot of lore about dragons inside the book, and while I don't think you need to feel shackled by the descriptions of dragons in the monster manual, they are a great place to start when you want to start thinking about the personality and the place where your dragon might live. So now that we have multiple draconic myths to draw on for inspiration, now we can decide what dragons are like in your campaign world, and they don't have to be giant 4-legged lizards. This idea that a dragon has 4 legs and 2 sets of wings and a wyvern only has 2 legs is something that was born from English and Scottish heraldry, really, and it's not a distinction that's made in any other mythology, and it doesn't need to be a distinction in your campaign either. Your dragons could have 2 legs, 4 legs, they could have 8 legs. Your dragons could have 2 sets of wings or 1 set of wings, or they could have no wings. Your dragons could have 7 heads. They could have scales or feathers, or they could be made from the bark or the ice or the volcanic rock of the environment that they have chosen as their lair. Are your dragons birthed from eggs? Do they hatch like common lizards? Or are they individuals that have transformed into a dragon through powerful magics or maybe intense emotions like Fafnir and greed? One change I like to make to dragons in my campaign is that there aren't breeds of dragon. Each and every dragon is a unique individual. There is no red dragons or blue dragons. There is the red dragon, the blue dragon. These don't necessarily confine them to certain behaviors or appearances even. The blue dragon in my campaign is more like a Haku Chinese Japanese dragon with no wings, moves through the air like the wind, whereas my red dragon is much closer to a classic D&D dragon with a massive spread of wings and a deep fiery breath. So with dragons having no real defined, definitive traits, they're not necessarily 4-legged giant lizards, you might be scratching your head and asking yourself, well, Ben, in that case, what is a dragon? And honestly, much like vampires, what makes a dragon are the themes that dragons can introduce into your campaign, which I think are threefold. First, dragons represent destruction on an unimaginable scale. Second, dragons are inherently arcane and mystic. That's what separates them from other sort of more bestial creatures such as griffins or wyverns. And thirdly, dragons are intelligent, and they usually represent human traits and attributes ratcheted up to 11. A dragon, I think, should feel like an unkillable behemoth, an absolute avatar of destruction, who you do not want to provoke into combat under any circumstances, because doing so is courting certain death. I often get in trouble a little bit for bringing up the later seasons of Game of Thrones, but whatever you think of the plot, one of my favorite scenes is when Drogon attacks the Lannister convoy in season 7, and you can see just how useless a man with a sword is against a dragon. A conventional fantasy army could not possibly stand up to a dragon, because the dragon can just fly away and strafe fire across the battle lines, and there's nothing this little sword or this little bow can do to harm that great creature. And this is inherent in many of the myths that we're drawing upon. Fafnir could only be injured if he was struck in his belly where he was weak, and that's very similar to Smaug having that one single weak spot on the underside of his scales as well. Dragons have an inherent mysticism to them, an arcaneness to them. They are creatures that are inherently magical because they have the ability to breathe fire or lightning or some other element that seems natural to that dragon. Dragons also have the ability in many mythologies to grant wishes or see into the future, and so giving your dragon access to spells or some other mystical ability can help separate them from other monsters in your campaign. And finally, dragons represent human attributes ratcheted up to 11. They are highly intelligent, or perhaps they're highly cunning, or maybe you have a dragon who's particularly vicious and savage. Dragons often embody greed, but I'll be honest, to me personally, it doesn't make much sense that such a powerful and ancient creature would care all that much about gold. Think about what your dragons want in your campaign. Players often assume that there's a hoard of gold wherever I put a dragon in my campaigns, and I can use this to lure them into conflict with the dragon, but maybe the dragon hoards other Draco kin to it instead. Its horde is a family of dragonborn. Or maybe your dragon does want gold, but it only wants gold because it knows that gold is important to the insect common folk it wants to oppress. So now that we have explored the themes of what makes a dragon and drawn inspiration from different mythologies, let's get down to the nitty-gritty, to the rules, to the stat block. And the stat blocks for dragons in the 5th edition Monster Manual are pretty good. I mean, they're pretty straightforward, they're simple and easy to run. They do look like massive chunks of text, but once you read through them and you get the idea behind the frightful presence and what their breath weapon does, you get a handle on them pretty quickly. The only real problem with these stat blocks is they can turn into big, hit point slogs between the dragon and the party back and forth if there aren't a few extra steps taken to make the dragon encounter feel truly epic. I think the easiest way to make a dragon encounter feel formidable and memorable is to lean into the environmental effects that the dragon has on their surroundings. Dragons are more than just giant monsters, as we've discussed. They're arcane beings that can influence their natural environment as much as their natural environment might influence them. Lean on those regional effects and those lair actions. Lair actions especially will make a combat with a dragon far more challenging, because maybe your dragon can cause roots to grow along the ground, rise up and ensnare the party, or maybe your dragon can cause gouts of flame to erupt up out of the ground. Wherever your dragon walks, if they're a black dragon, they leave these little drooling pools of acid that the party can't then walk through, or else they're going to take acid damage. Of course, almost as important as the rules themselves is how you describe your dragon. Like we talked about in the monster video, you should take the time to describe your dragon and impart onto your players the massive scale of this creature, especially the first time that they encounter it. If your dragon uses their breath weapon, even those that aren't caught within the cone of that breath weapon's influence should feel the immense heat coming off of it, or all their hands stand on end. Ooh. Or maybe all their hair stands on end as the air around them becomes ionized. There's no reason why a dragon's lair actions need to be bound to its lair specifically either. I think that dragons have the ability to influence the environment around them wherever they go, and so maybe they're most powerful in their lair, but a blue dragon can draw thunderstorms to itself in any location. When a red dragon lands, just its very presence causes the earth to split open and fire to be evoked from beneath. So we have our dragon stat block. We're just about ready for them to encounter the party, but we need to think of a few final things, and that is, what does our dragon want, and how are they going to get it? What are their combat tactics if a fight does break out with the player characters? But I think what really separates a dragon from any other monster is that whatever it is they want, it should be more than an easy meal, or it should be more than a full stomach, because that's just the desires of any normal monstrous creature, like an owlbear or a wyvern. Your dragon should be more philosophical. They should be more like an NPC in your campaign than just a monster. Maybe your dragon is good aligned, but comes into conflict with the player characters when it decides that it's going to nestle down in a specific area, and it's so aloof it expects all the local farmers and all the local towns to move away from it. Or maybe your dragon is specifically evil and it is trying to raise an army simply because it is amused when common folk fight each other. The timing of when you present your dragon to your player characters is going to be about as important as choosing their stat block when it determines how formidable the dragon comes across. Don't present your dragon to your player characters when they're already level 12, 13, 14, because at that point, they're probably pretty well equipped and experienced to be able to take on even an ancient dragon. Present them to the party when they're level 5 or 6. Sure, the party could do damage to a dragon, but they're still going to be absolutely immolated by the dragon's breath weapon. Hitting on that theme that dragons represent sheer, overwhelming force will only be successful if your dragon represents sheer, overwhelming force that the party can't possibly defend against. Maybe there's a combat encounter with the dragon, maybe there's not. Maybe the dragon flies away if the party managed to reduce it to half or a quarter of its hit points, or maybe it flies away with the body of one of the player characters once one of them has been slain as a lesson to the rest of the party of the dragon's dominance. Now that the formidable reputation of your dragon has been established, they can remain as a threatening presence through the next leg of the campaign as the player characters level up. Fighting a dragon, defeating them through combat shouldn't be the only way to resolve issues with a dragon, because, as we've touched on, they're intelligent creatures. They have the capacity to negotiate, or they have the capacity to be philosophical about the world around them. Maybe the player characters can bribe the dragon. Maybe they can convince it to leave the region that it's terrorizing. Or maybe they can come to some other solution. Maybe they become champions of the dragon if it's a good aligned dragon, and they decide, all right, you can live in this area and then we will enforce law and order around this area on your behalf, so you don't have to fly down off your mountain and burn everybody in the location that you consider injustice to be happening. If your player characters do manage to level up to that 10th, 11th, 12th level, and they do want to go and fight the dragon, just remember to lean into the lair actions that we've discussed, into the fact that the dragon has wings. Their tactics in combat will help make them seem formidable. Don't let them just sit on the ground like their feet are nailed down and allow the barbarian to just wail on them. Have them fly up into the air, fly away from the player characters, or maybe they even strafe the battlefield with fire. Instead of thinking of their breath weapon as a static cone that only happens at a specific point, have the breath weapon be a line across the battlefield where the dragon has flown over the top and strafed it. Make sure to make use of their legendary actions. The wing attack that most dragons have is really useful, not just for doing damage to the party, but getting the dragon out of danger if it does end its previous turn on the ground. If the party are fighting the dragon in its lair and it decides to crawl into a tight space, it's probably doing so because it's trying to lure the party there. If it's a black dragon or a green dragon that lives near a lagoon or a swamp, have it swim down into the water where it has the greatest advantage rather than the player characters. Again, use the dragon's environment to make it feel like a formidable threat. Dragons are intelligent creatures, so don't let them forget that they have wings. So very broadly speaking, that is how I represent dragons in my D&D campaign to make them seem formidable to the player characters. Have you encountered a dragon in your game before, or have you featured one? If you're the GM, leave a comment down below to let us know. And if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, because we are back every week with more advice about how to run D&D 5th edition.
I am a god made of armor and flesh. I control the storms. I topple mountains. I make the very earth bleed fire. I am ancient, from before when these lands took their shape. I demand tribute, in servitude if you cannot pay me gold. So tell me, insect, what is your small life worth to me?